Traditional culture is dying, but there's a way we can save it. More on that later. First, we're going to take a look at the differences between popular culture and traditional or local culture. Let's start off with old pop culture. Popular culture is pretty self-explanatory. It's culture that just happened to get popular. What makes it so different from traditional culture is its sheer size. Pop culture is much, much larger and more globalized than the generally small-scale traditional culture. Now, for the example, in the beautifully shot film at the beginning of the video, I used a good old-fashioned can of Coca-Cola, which is popular pretty much everywhere in the entire universe at this point, so I really don't see why not. Secondly, we've got traditional culture, which is basically the exact same thing as local culture, but with a different word in front of culture. It's much more small-scale than pop culture, and a little bit less likely to bond well with all those newfangled technologies and ways of life. Traditional culture's example in the Oscar-worthy film accompaniment shown earlier is a bottle of a much smaller scale soda called Zuberfizz. Zuberfizz is a little soda startup up in Durango, Colorado. The only reason I've ever heard of it is because they stole my last name, those crazy guys. Alright, back to that cliffhanger at the beginning. Traditional culture is dying. How can a culture die, you ask? Well, that's an excellent observation, Jimmy. Cultures can't die, like plants and animals do. They can, however, stop being practiced. One of the main reasons for this is the globalization of pop culture. As pop culture spreads, traditional culture dies. And pop culture spreads really, really fast. Say, for example, you're a little boy living in Angola and you somehow hear about that mythical device called an iPhone, and you throw aside your cultural past of letter delivering and whatnot in favor of using a phone all the time. Congratulations! By buying into pop culture, you just became an accessory in the slow murder of your traditional culture. Now, don't fret. There's a way to save your culture. We just have to get through that age-old question. How? Now, seeing as I'm traditionally blind to the ways of the world, I went to the internet to get a broader opinion. And according to this strangely helpful WikiHow article, there's one big way to save traditional culture. Just continue practicing it. Anyone could have thought of that, you say, and you know what? You're right. Anyone could have thought of that. But it's that relative simplicity that makes it such a viable option. Even if a culture doesn't particularly meld well in the modern day, just throw away the iPhone for a day or two, at least an hour, and go out there and do something culture-y in a traditional sense. It doesn't matter if you're doing some sort of traditional dance or attending the celebration of a traditional holiday, just do it. If no one practices these cultures, how can we expect them to stay alive? Alright, we've heard what a random WikiHow article has to say. Here's what I think. The best way to preserve your culture is by actually preserving it. Sure, practicing a culture is all fine and dandy, but what happens when no one has any idea what that culture happens to be? If these cultures aren't written down or recorded in any way, they'll just pass into the annals of time, another forgotten tradition in an uncaring universe. If someone is a member of a traditional culture, write its history down in the traditional way, with a scroll or something. It would even help for outsiders to record footage of traditional practices for them to get widespread attention. One of the best parts about this option is that it's extremely cheap. As long as you can afford a few scraps of paper, some piece of garbage disposable camera, you can do your part in preserving traditional cultures wherever they may be. Traditional culture is dying, but there's a way we can save it. And with any luck, we will.
We passed up on the stairs. We spoke of was and when, although I wasn't there. He said I was his friend, which came as some surprise. I spoke into his eyes. I thought you died alone a long, long time ago.
Alright, I'm back, because every movie needs an after-credit scene, as we all know. And I completely forgot to mention something in words. I did have the pictures up, but I forgot to mention that this is a global problem. Traditional culture dies out all across the world in all kinds of places, but just two of the examples I used were in India, where things are slowly being phased out for a more modern feel, and in America, with Native American culture, which was almost eradicated and forced purely onto reservations after America became a thing, as it is today. I don't know what I'm saying. That's enough. Goodbye.